I am Nahed Kabbani, and this is the Lighthouse for today's viewers. Welcome to our show. Year 2006 is over, but as any other year, it becomes history and it leaves some kind of actions for next years. The coming years will follow the action what we had at year 2006, especially Middle East actions. To review the year 2006 with the actions in the Middle East and how much it affects us or still act on year 2007, we would like to welcome Mr. Sami Mashney to shed some light about those issues. Let's welcome Mr. Sami.
Thanks, Nahed, for your welcome, and I'm very pleased to be on your show again. My name is Sami Mashney. I'm an American of Palestinian descent. I was born in occupied Palestine, and I lived in the United States for 27 years. And I came here when I was 23 years old. I'm an attorney, and I'm also active in various community groups.
So year 2006 is over and it become history. What we carry from that year to this year about Middle East? What happened in the Middle East?
Well, a lot of things have happened, and whether it's in Palestine or in Iraq and other Arab countries, the events continue to unfold, and but I personally don't see any progress. I don't see things moving in the right direction, in the direction of peace. However, I'm an ultimate optimist. I never lose hope, and optimism that one day common sense will prevail, and that people in Palestine, Iraq, the Middle East, and throughout the world will live in peace and treat each other with equality and respect.
So the major action was Lebanon war. What is in it to carry for this year?
Well, the Israeli invasion and bombardment of Lebanon was a one-sided war. On the one hand, you have the third strongest military on earth, which is Israel, attacking a country that's doesn't have airplanes, doesn't have tanks, doesn't have the type of missiles used by the Israeli Navy, doesn't have a navy, and there was an aerial bombardment by Israel on Lebanon for about 33 days, and although the resistance forces in Lebanon, they fought on the ground effectively, and they bloodied the nose of the Israeli invaders, but the casualties on the Lebanese side were very high. Approximately 1,500 people died, and thousands injured, and real estate and infrastructure was destroyed in the billions of dollars, and there were many innocent civilians died, including about 55 people in an apartment complex. They were hunkering down from the bombardment, and the Israelis bombed out their apartment complex and killed them all, women, children, and elderly people. And also the Israelis, they bombed out the United Nations outpost, killing, I believe, 2 or 3 international peacekeepers. So, and what's the result? Nothing. The end result is that the resistance fighters in Lebanon became more popular with the Lebanese and the Arab street. Israel did not accomplish its objective, which proves that the use of the military force in an arrogant way without first exhausting all peaceful means always has the boomerang effect, which comes back and hits the aggressor in their face.
To remind our viewers, who is exactly get hurt in Lebanon, the Lebanese or the Palestinian in Lebanon, and how many Palestinians in that area still live there?
Well, it's always in wars. Unfortunately, the disempowered and the poor people end up being harmed more than people who are powerful and who have more means. In Lebanon, the Palestinian refugees who live in squalid refugee camps, they received a very big brunt of the Israeli invasion, and they had no way to or means to fight back. And the Palestinian refugee camps were bombarded, and hundreds of people were killed, and thousands were maimed. They're already poor. Life situations getting even poorer and poorer. And let's not forget that in the last 2 or 3 days of the war, Israel dropped 1 million cluster bombs. This is after the peace accords, or the ceasefire, I should say, were reached, and it was agreed that Israel will withdraw on a date certain. Within the last 2 days or so, they dropped about 1 million cluster bombs. These cluster bombs are still, on Lebanese soils and inside Palestinian refugee camps. They continue to explode until today, maiming children, women, adults, and there was really no military significance or advantage for Israel to do that. The only outcome of that is that the civilians will be injured after the ceasefire, and the relations between the Palestinians and the Lebanese people on one side and the Israelis on the other side will become even worse. So there is no beneficiary, unless it's the objective of the Israelis and the Israeli government is to further widen the divide between the Israelis and the Arab people.
What about the election in Palestine last year?
Well, as we know, in Palestine, Hamas, which stands for the Islamic Resistance Movement. These are the first acronyms of the term in Arabic, Islamic Resistance Movement. They won the election. Now, I am personally opposed to sectarianism and any political group or party that draws its politics or policy from religion. Hamas does draw its politics from religion, from Islam, and philosophically I am opposed to that. However, we have to understand why Hamas came to power. Hamas came to power because of the disenchantment and disillusionment of the Palestinian people with the various other modes of relief they tried. They tried, nationalism, Arab nationalism. They tried socialism. They tried to, ally themselves with Iraq. They tried various forms, and whatever form of resistance to the occupation they choose, Israel, and with the assistance of our government, I'm sorry to say, the United States, struck hard and crushed whatever form of resistance they chose. So the only thing that's left right now is the Islamic approach to resistance, and this is why we see that not only in Palestine, we see it in Iran, we see it in Iraq right now, we see it growing in Egypt, in Algeria, and various Arab countries. And this is a symptom of the fact that these masses are hungry for change, they're hungry for relief, they're hungry for prosperity and happiness, and they tried all other forms of relief to reduce their stress, the national stress, and either didn't work or was fought very hard by the powers that want to oppress, the Arab people. So they're left with the Islamic or Islamicist choice, and as much as many Palestinian people don't like sectarianism, etc., but when they have to compare Hamas, which is a sectarian movement, with, for example, Abbas, the PLO, with the corruption and the security transgressions by his people, a lot of people who are even secular are siding with Hamas or choosing Hamas. I am not one of those people because I cannot support any organization or group that draws its policies from religion. So the situation is very, very bad, and the only way it can improve, which will benefit the Israelis as well as the Palestinian people, is to relax the conditions the Palestinian people are living under in terms of putting bread on their table, giving them less repressive atmosphere. When that starts to happen, people will become less and less supportive of Hamas because they see a light at the end of the tunnel, and they don't have to resort to the extreme of using religion as a means for them to accomplish their political objectives.
So as news, I'm confused what to name those people. Are they freedom fighters or terrorists, what we explain or describe the terrorism now?
Well, I mean, everybody agrees with the old saying that, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. If you want to look back at our history here, George Washington, he was a freedom fighter as far as the American people are concerned. However, if you ask the Brits, the Britain, colonialist government at that point, I'm sure they would have called him, a terrorist. Now, the same thing, Patrick Henry, he's the one who said, give me liberty or give me death. Now, if a Palestinian or Iraqi or any other person right now stands up and says, give me liberty or give me death, say, oh, suicide bomber. So it's a question of, who, in the eye of the beholder, who is it, the one who is being repressed, who is the one who is repressing? The one who is repressing has a tendency to call all those who are opposed to the oppression or occupation as terrorists, quote unquote, and the one who's being oppressed, whether they're right or wrong, they don't consider themselves terrorists, they consider themselves freedom fighters. One more thing, which is very important, that we have to always differentiate between the people who fight on their own land to repel an occupier versus the people who travel around the globe to put bombs in trains, like in Madrid, to do the September 11, Twin Tower bombing. Those people are, without any question, terrorists because they're killing a lot of innocent civilians that are geographically and politically far removed from the region of the conflict. So it is one thing for a Palestinian, for example, whose family has been killed, tortured, etc., to fight back, to resist the Israeli soldiers and occupiers, and do whatever they do. And by the way, I do not endorse conflict resolution by violence. I'm just describing what people do or say. It's one thing for that Palestinian to resist occupation in Palestine. It's another thing for an Islamicist to go to Madrid or Basque terrorist or any other person who uses violence to against innocent civilians to resolve a conflict on a soil that's not the same soil as where the conflict is or was.
We are talking about 58 years now, Palestinian-Israeli situation, and Palestinians struggle for their own rights or their own land. I think it's something different than terrorism, in a way.
Yeah, of course. I mean, anybody who labels Palestinian resistance to the military violent Israeli occupation as quote-unquote terrorism is either somebody who's misinformed or insincere. I mean, if you're going to use the same standard, then you have to label the French resistance to Nazi occupation as terrorist. We don't do that. I mean, the French resistance and other European resistance to Nazi occupation, it's glorified, it became legend. etc., etc., etc. Why? Because here were the Germans, the Nazis, on foreign soil. They were oppressing, the people who they occupied. The same thing. Israel is on Palestinian soil. It represses people in a very brutal, systematic, and chronic way. And the Palestinian people who resist their occupation, they do that not as of luxury, not because they get up in the morning, oh, I'm bored, I have nothing to do, so let me go ahead and blow up the Israelis. No, people do it because every Palestinian, every family is connected immediately to another member of their family who were either killed, jailed, exiled, tortured, humiliated by the Israelis. There is no one single Palestinian family that does not have a member of their immediate family who was not harmed by the Israelis. Members of my family were harmed by the Israelis. I'm sure members of your family were harmed by Israelis. And I have not met one single Palestinian whose family did not have one immediate member who was not harmed by the Israelis. So when you have a situation like this, and we're not talking about a year or 2 or 5 years or 10 years, this has been going on since 1948. It's like 3 generations. And it's actually very surprising that the Palestinian people took them a very long time, to resort to violent means to resolve the conflict with Israel. I mean, violence started in the past 10 or 15 years after the Palestinians reached the national consensus that there's no light at the end of the tunnel, that the more they act peaceful or complacent with Israel, the more Israel will brutalize them, steal their land, imprison their men and women, and torture them in jail. So they figured that, heck, we have nothing to lose. We're being killed anyway. We might as well resist. The same concept that the Jewish people did in Masada, where they were surrounded by the Romans, and the Jewish legend says that instead of them surrendering, they committed mass suicide. So today the Palestinians are the David of the Middle East, and the Israelis are the Goliath. And I think moral and decent people should always be on the side of David, not the Goliath. The Palestinians are the David.
If we talk about democracy in the Middle East, I believe the Palestinian people shows that they are accepting and they are practicing democracy, especially when the election happened. And we have our former President Carter as a witness over there, and he knows all details. What about the election and the democracy, what we talk about?
Well, no one can dispute the authenticity of the democratic process that in the last Palestinian election, which brought Hamas to power. There's no question it was witnessed by former President Carter, who is now the international guru on the fairness and legitimacy of elections, and many other international observers. The thing that I always have to remind people, that the current Palestinian street mood and their electoral leanings, which right now leans towards Hamas, an Islamist group, and not secular groups, is because of what has been happening to the Palestinian people for the last 58 years. I mean, if the Palestinian people are given a choice in a relaxed society, just like United States or Israel or Europe, etc., Hamas will not get 10% of the vote. But because there's so much stress and pressure and brutality and subjugation, people become extreme in their thoughts and in their politics. And this is why, in my opinion, they support Hamas, which they see it as a savior, for the Palestinian people. When the PLO failed, Abbas failed, Arafat failed, Nasser failed, the United States gave many empty promises that were never fulfilled. Israel keeps brutalizing. So what else do you do when you tried 99 choices and you're left with one choice, the 100th choice? So Hamas is the 100th choice for the Palestinian people. If you restore any of the 99 choices that existed before, which does not include having to support an Islamist organization, the Palestinian people will very gladly take that. They will support a secular group or organization. And the Palestinian people have always been secular, and it's just in the last few years they went towards Hamas because of the amount of oppression that they are subjected to on a daily basis by the Israeli occupation forces.
Recently, Mr. Carter, former President Carter, witnessed so many things and so many activities for peace since 1980s. And I believe I heard that with the Clinton rules, after 20 years, there's millions of documents will be released soon or released already the end of the year. And we will hear more about that kind of action for peace within those 20 years ago. But Mr. Carter recently wrote a book about this kind of time and action. What do you think about Mr. Carter book?
You refer to the book Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid, and this is an historical book because number one, it's written by a former president, somebody whose stature and credibility and patriotism cannot be questioned by anyone, in the United States, and cannot be easily attacked by Israeli supported as quote unquote anti-Semitic. So his book basically concludes that Israeli form of governance over the Palestinians is apartheid, just like the South African apartheid government, the former one. It treated Africans, black Africans, in a way where their rights and privileges were not equal to those of the white Caucasians or European. What's good about this book is that it brought a new level of discourse in American politics where a lot of mainstream people right now can quote Carter and say, well, Israel is an apartheid state, and the only difference is that in South Africa used to be a white on black, separation, segregation. Here it's a Jewish or Jew on Christian and Muslim separation and segregation. And we always knew this out. This is not a new fact. It's the first time it's being brought into the discourse in America by a former president, and not just any former president. Carter, nobody can question his humanity, his benevolence. He's the one who started Habitat for Humanity, where he builds homes for people who are not rich and they don't have a lot of resources. And he's the only American president who was able to engineer a peace agreement between Israel and the Arab country, which was in Egypt. And nobody can question his motivation and his dedication and his humanity. And I'm very happy that he did that. And I think many writers and opinion molders right now are following on the bandwagon. Israelis themselves are writing, yes, we have an apartheid state. And this is in my opinion, the only thing that will ultimately force the Zionist Israeli government to change its policies in the Middle East and follow the same exact approach to bring peace in the Middle East, just like South Africa did. I am convinced, and I insist, that the only solution to this problem is peaceful and legislative, meaning that Israel has to enact laws to cancel and do away with all laws that discriminate against non-Jews in Palestine, just like South Africa did when it abolished apartheid.
Actually, President Carter have the guts and the strength to witness the history of time he was there, and he was as a president involved with those actions, and he as a person, his personality he is a peaceful person. He is not writing just to say something bad about this side or this side. Maybe with this book, at least it will say just one thing, in my opinion, that Israel is not an untouchable state. We have to look at the truth to be able to solve the problems.
Yes.
And now I believe it's a great a gift for us, all of us, as the whole world, as American also, to have some documents can work with it to continue follow his direction for peace, for future. He wrote part of the history on his hand. He didn't read it, he just wrote it.
Yes. No, I agree with you. I don't think there's any person, any American person, more qualified than President Carter to discuss the issue of peace in Palestine from an American perspective. And President Carter's qualifications are both, knowledge of the facts. He knows exactly about the Arabs and the Israelis, and he was there to the point where he was able to hammer out a peace agreement between Egypt and Israel. He's also morally qualified. He's the only former president who's doing so much charity and helping people who are disadvantaged, and he never started any unnecessary wars like our current president. For example, the war in Iraq, which has killed between Iraqis and Americans, close to 700,000 people. So if there's a true a human person, a true principled person, somebody who is really a true Christian, I would say is President Carter. And anybody who attacks President competence or credibility will lose credibility, because President Carter, in my opinion, is untouchable both in terms of what he knows and what he is all about in terms of his sincerity.
One World Oregon, promoting cultural understanding through the media.
Before we start talking about other issues, there is more books in the market, at least from the other side of the other opinions, especially the Israeli writer who wrote the ethnic cleansing of Palestine lately. And those documents will help because it's from the other side of the people. How you look at those things?
Yes. Well, yeah. The book is written by Ilan Pappé, I-L-A-N Pappé, P-A-P-P-E. He's an Israeli, professor and human rights activist. It's called the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. The Israeli government and the Zionists have always denied that they ethnically cleansed Palestine, because their propaganda, when they enticed the Jewish people of the world to come to Palestine, was that quote unquote land without people for people without land. So they said that Palestine has no people and we Jewish people have no land. Okay, let's go to Palestine. But this was the biggest lie, because Palestine was and has always been populated by people, and that point was populated by Palestinians. So that the Jewish people came as immigrants in large numbers, and through their determination and preparation and the assistance of the British colonialist rulers who were ruling Palestine at that point, they managed to take over the Palestine. And so whatever was Palestine in 1948 became Israel. In 1967 Israel took the rest of Palestine. So right now, although Palestine, it exists politically, it exists in our mind, it exists in terms of that there are Palestinian people out there, but we don't have state, we don't have sovereignty, we're occupied people, just like the French were occupied in World War II, just like we occupied Japan after World War II, etc. So this book by Ilan Pappé, it proves what Israel did in terms of it erased many villages, that were Palestinian, so that it wanted to change the nature of the land, saying there was no Palestinians here, etc. And one good way to know about Palestinian villages is Palestinians used to plant cactus plants. So if you go in a place that appears to have no houses or etc., if you see cactus plants growing, this was a site where Palestinian town or villages existed that was erased by Israel completely. One other thing they did is to change the names from the Arabic name to a Hebrew name. For example, Bisan, it's called they call it now Bishan. Bi'r al-Saba in Arabic is called Beersheba, and so on and so forth. And the other way they did is, whenever there's a Palestinian town that they did not erase, they will encircle it, with Jewish, buildings and population. So the Jewish population will grow and will propagate, expand, while the Palestinian town or village is landlocked. It cannot grow, and this is part of the systematic, and in a way the Zionists, the Israelis, have used consistently from the beginning till now to make sure that Palestinians in Palestine don't grow and don't prosper and don't have a normal lifestyle, while they continue to encourage Jewish people to immigrate from Russia, from Australia, from everywhere in the world, so that Israel will be a quote Jewish state, to the exclusion and to the disadvantage of the pre-existing Christian and Muslim Palestinian population.
In my opinion, this is the major point for the Palestinian-Israeli issue to not be solved, because occupation by power is known in the whole world historically. People with power occupy any land and live with it and give rights to the people in the land. But for this matter, for this area, Israel occupied this land and changed it because they think this is their land as a chosen people, which is historically, it's too old story to go back to the same point and find that land. If we look at Palestinian, Israeli that way and give them the right, why we don't go back historically for all over the world, not just this country or this area? I
Yes.
don't think it works this way.
I agree with you. You hit the nail on the head. If we want to rely on subjective, religious, claims to solve problems between people, we're going to have the whole world will become like what's happening right now in Iraq between the Shia and the Sunnis. Religion only pertains to whoever believes in it. For example, if Muslims believe a certain thing, it pertains to Muslims and only the Muslims who believe in whatever it is, and you cannot apply it universally.
And for God, not for us.
Exactly. And if Christians believe in a certain thing, they cannot say, since we Christians believe in it, the whole world must believe in it, must follow the rule. The same thing about the Jewish claim that they're quote unquote the chosen people and God gave them the land, etc. While they may want to believe that, that's fine. Everybody's entitled to their opinion and beliefs. However, when they use that claim, which a lot of people question them, and to use it to take somebody else's land, it becomes, self-serving, selfish proposition, and it's a recipe for war and strife. I could tell you that I had a revelation last night, and I saw God, and I spoke with God, and God told me that America must go to the Arabs. And what would you say? You say, I'm crazy. This person is a lunatic. There's no difference between the Jewish claim that God, quote unquote, gave them Palestine, and I never knew that God was in the real estate business, and where is the deed, then anybody saying that God gave me America or God gave me Canada or so on and so forth. Civilized people must solve their problems by recognizing each other's humanity and by respecting each other. Respect is really the linchpin of peace, the linchpin of human relations. If you don't respect people, you don't treat them as equal human beings, you will tend to take away their rights. If you respect them and treat them equally, like you want to be treated, you will be fair with them, and you will make sure you don't aggress against them. You don't take their land, you don't confiscate their property, you don't imprison their young people, and so on and so forth. So respect. Israel and Zionists must respect, the Palestinians who are Christians and Muslims the same way we respect them. Without that, there will be no peace.
Well, anyway, there's a lot of Jews in Morocco and Yemen and other areas in that land, the big land at that time, with no borders.
Yes.
And I don't think they count them as Israeli.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between a Jewish person per se and an Israeli and a Zionist. Jewish people are like any other people, like Christians, Muslims, etc. And it's just they happen to belong to a certain religion, just like others. And usually people do not choose their religion; they inherit it from their parents. So there is really nothing intellectual or, mentally a giant thing about being a religion. Now, Zionism is a political movement. Just like people, they turn Judaism from a faith into a political movement. Just like, for example, the KKK, they turn their Christianity or their being Caucasian or white as a political movement, or the Nazis, they turned their German nationalism into the Nazi movement. The Italians, the time Mussolini, they became fascist. So Zionism is a form of fascism, it's a form of racism, and it's actually the number one reason why there's anti-Semitism in the world, historically and today, is because of Zionism. Whatever Zionists and Israelis do, it reflects negatively not only on Zionists and Israelis, but on all Jews at large. So it's in the interest of Jewish people and all peace-loving people, all people who fight discrimination, racism, to join hands together to fight Zionism and make sure that the Jewish people are not disadvantaged or hatred against them does not grow because of the policies and the actions of Zionists and the Israelis.
Don't go, stay tuned with us. I believe Iraq war is well known, everybody knows, especially our kids as American military get here there. We lost 3,000 military men, young people have families, etc. But the major point, I believe, before the end of the year, couple days before the end of the year, Saddam Hussein assassination is the major point. What do you think about this kind of action?
The invasion of Iraq is one of the most tragic events that happened in this, third millennium, and it's a decision that was made by one person, which is our president, George W. Bush. The victims are the Iraqi people, our men and women in Iraq, and peace and stability throughout the region. Who are the beneficiaries? The short-term beneficiaries are Israel and Halliburton, who were able to remove Saddam as the only, possible military deterrent for Israel in the region. And all people who are informed and sincere and who just search things on the internet, on Google or Yahoo, they will find out easily that our invasion of Iraq and our, deposing of, the former Iraqi president Saddam Hussein was done at the behest and the dictate of the Israeli lobby. It has nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction. Everybody knows that this was a giant lie, or peace and stability in the region, or security or democracy. Now, right now our men and women in Iraq are enduring, very harsh conditions. They're being blown up, by the Iraqi people who are fighting the occupation, fighting each other. And this big madhouse right now, the hell that was created in Iraq, did not exist as such before Saddam Hussein was deposed. There's no question that Saddam Hussein was a dictator, he was brutal, but he was able to contain the country together and have stability. I know many Iraqis right now who were initially kind of enthused about the removal of Saddam Hussein. Right now, they lament the present situation, and they wish that the rule of Saddam Hussein comes back, because the present alternative is by no means acceptable by anyone. So this is the biggest disaster and nobody knows how it will fan out. And pretty soon the people who die will exceed 1 million. So why would somebody do something, a war that we did not have to go to, had nothing to do with terrorism, had nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, and end up killing approximately 1 million people? It escapes my mind. Why would we do that?
So many people become refugees also, left Iraq. Who knows when they will come back?
Absolutely. There are hundreds of thousands and more of Iraqi, especially intellectuals and professionals, who have escaped Iraq because right now people are dying, indiscriminately. They're dying because of whoever they are, whether they're Sunni, Shiite, Christian, Palestinians, they're dying. And one a giant footnote for this whole tragedy are the Palestinians in Iraq who became refugees in 1948 when Israel took over most of Palestine. They became refugees again in 1967 when Israel took over the rest of Palestine. Some of those settled in Iraq. Now those people are being ethnically cleansed from Iraq by the Shiites or others, and etc. And they're stranded at the border between Iraq, Jordan, Iraq, and Syria. And their situation is very miserable and terrible and horrible. There's no government that is able to defend them or whisk them away to a safe place. And it's just the tragedy of the Palestinian people continues from generation to generation, and it will not stop until Palestinians are able to return to their home in occupied Palestine and have a Palestinian government that will protect them and help them in case there's any war or strife or something similar.
I wonder how they will live in the other countries. Do you think United Nations or UNESCO or UNRWA will help them the way they help Palestinians when they become refugees?
Well, for example, the Palestinians in Lebanon, they're legally not authorized to work. Their ID says not authorized to work. 22 serious, well-paying jobs, they cannot do these jobs. There's Palestinians who live in Lebanon, refugees, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, basically in every Arab country. And what's bad about it is that no matter how long they spend in the given country, and even if their children are born there, they will continue to be Palestinian refugees. They never acquire the citizenship of the country where they came from. And at any time there's instability or war or strife in that host country, or a disagreement with the Palestinian leadership, etc., those Palestinian refugees, no matter how long they live, they immediately, the government puts pressure on them, they expel them, and they take some of them to jail, and they remind them, you're a refugee, you don't belong here, and it's going to continue forever. Now, this has happened 58 years ago. Until now, there are people who are born in Arab countries, and they continue to be Palestinian refugees and not citizens of the countries where they were born. And this tragic situation. And I do blame the Arab countries and regimes for treating the Palestinians in such a discriminatory way when they're supposed to be.
It shouldn't be, but I believe the Arab countries get paid from United Nations to keep those people, to help keeping those people. That's the aid what we give to those countries. That's why they don't do anything to that story, Palestine-Israeli issue.
Yeah, that is true. UNICEF, does send payments and assistance, and goes to, the host countries, the Arab countries, and I'm certain that some of that money does not reach the intended recipients, the Palestinian refugees, but it goes to the corrupt politicians in the Arab countries. I have no doubt in my mind that this happens. And corruption is all over the globe. It's not endemic, it's not just in the Arab countries. There's corruption everywhere, including here in the United States.
Let's hope for better.
Special obligation to help them. Zain Verji is following the story. She joins us now live from Washington. Zain, Relitza, thousands of Iraqis want to seek refuge in the United States to escape the sectarian violence and persecution that they say they face in Iraq, but they're encountering some major obstacles to coming here. new identities for new lives. 2 Iraqi refugees now living in the United States won't show their faces but want to tell their stories to U.S. lawmakers.
My name was listed on the doors of several mosques.
A truck driver who brought water to American troops says he was jumped by insurgents, beaten and threatened with death. And an interpreter for the U.S. military says he narrowly escaped a car bomb attack. Thousands of Iraqis who serve as contractors, guides or translators for Americans are now targets of assassination and fleeing their country. Experts say Iraq is the fastest growing refugee crisis in the world. About 2 million Iraqis have fled their country. 100,000 people flee Iraq a month. Nearly 2 million Iraqis have abandoned their homes and are refugees in their own country. Yet, since the 2003 invasion of Iraq, only 466 Iraqis have been allowed to come to the United States as refugees, partly because of limited quotas and partly because of how difficult it is to determine who meets refugee status criteria.
Because of an enhanced security review that has been required, that has made it very difficult for these Iraqi refugees pass through the screening mechanism.
Some lawmakers say Iraqis deserve the help of the U.S. government and want to speed up the process of getting refugees safely to America.
We do have a special obligation to keep faith with the Iraqis who have bravely worked for us and often paid a terrible price for it, by providing them with safe refuge in the United States.
Aid agencies say a big concern is a complex law passed in 2005 that bans aid to terrorist organizations.
Many Iraqis have been kidnapped or paid ransom to terrorist groups inside Iraq to get loved ones back. And unfortunately, the Bush administration does consider those types of payments as material support that would bar them from entry to the U.S.
These Iraqi families are among hundreds of thousands of Iraqi refugees now in neighboring Jordan and Syria, without work or easy access to healthcare and education.
They all were victims of kidnappings, tortures, rapes, murders in their families, their homes being bombed in the middle of the night. The level of violence has gotten very extreme.
Advocates say more money is needed to process and resettle refugees in the United States and give them homes and training so they can be self-sufficient. In Relitza, the State Department acknowledges that the refugee situation is a major problem. They say that what they want to do is to work with Congress to try and provide a special status to Iraqi religious minorities, as well as Iraqis who have helped the U.S. government, and try and make that process for them to come here a lot easier. Relitza?
So, Zain, is the U.S. accepting applications at this time?
I talked to a number of refugee agencies, and what they said was that basically the U.S. is not accepting any direct applications from Iraqis who want to apply at embassies. What's happening is that the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is dealing with the screening process, and they're actually quite hesitant to refer Iraqis who are seeking refuge to the United States because they're aware of the limited quotas. They also have major budget problems as well, so they can't really expedite the process. What the UN is looking for is $60 million to be provided to try and facilitate this for Iraqi refugees, and they want the United States to pick up half of that. Relitza?
Hey, Zain Verji of the State Department, thank you very much.
Okay, I believe those actions from year 2006, we will carry it for longer than next year, coming year, but at least how do you see those actions specifically as Lebanon or Palestine or Iraq? What do you think about this year will be happening?
Yeah, well, you know, people who are intricately knowledgeable with the Middle East, they will, and they are sincere and honest, they will tell you that, you know, the central, you know, the focus point of all the issues and the problems in the wars in the Middle East has to do with Palestine. As a matter of fact, you know, in the Baker-Hamilton report, you know, a very big part of what they said is that, you know, part of the solution of the Iraq issue has to do with making, you know, advances and success on resolving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. This has been said from the beginning till today, and so they're not separated. The problems in Lebanon, the war in Lebanon, the strife, it has something to do with Israel. the instability in Jordan has something to do with Israel. The Islamic Brotherhood in Egypt, the resurgence and their gaining political power has to do with Israel. Hamas's rise to power has to do with Israel. Why? Because when people are oppressed, when people are subjected to so much pressure, they try to resist it, they try to release the pressure, it's not resolved, it's not released, they will become more extreme, more militant, to the point where they could reach the point of becoming, what you can call terrorists or whatever it is. Now, take the situation in Iraq. One of the reasons why our government, the United States, is unable to impose a political solution that will establish peace and stability is because our government itself does not have credibility. And they measure our government's credibility by what it does in Palestine. Say, well, this is the government that's aided Israel. This is the government that gives Israel billions of dollars every year. This is the government that gives Israel cluster bombs, gives them F-16s, gives them hundreds of vetoes in the United Nations and Security Council. Whenever Israel does something bad, the whole world condemns Israel except the United States. So they look and say, why should we trust George W. Bush or the American government if they are the same people who are aiding and abetting and making it possible for Israel to continue to oppress and brutalize our brethren, the Palestinian people? So if we want to gain credibility as Americans in the Middle East and throughout the world, the best way to do it, the fastest way to do it, is we have to start dealing with the Palestinian issue in a more even-handed way. I'm not saying to take the side of the Palestinians, I'm talking about
justice.
Not take the Israeli side as much. Right now, we give Israel billions, weaponry, political support, etc. We give the Palestinians nothing. As a matter of fact, we aid the Israelis in brutalizing the Palestinian and the CIA action against the Palestinian and putting pressure on the Palestinian in the United States, etc., and so on and so forth. So if we become more even-handed, the scale is tipped this way. If the scale becomes just a little bit even still towards the Israel, but not as much, our government will gain more stability. When the scale becomes like this, or even, our government will have so much credibility to the point where it's trusted and believed in Iraq and other parts of the Arab and the Muslim world. And this phenomenon of terrorism will subside because it has so much to do with the chronic effect over generations and generations of how our government deals with the Palestinian-Israeli issue. So this is the single most important issue that we must tackle it to achieve peace and harmony. Until and unless we do that, the situation is only going to get worse, and militancy and terrorism and political Islamicism will continue to rise to the point where it may become unmanageable at some point. It may become irreversible. So the sooner we do this, the better. Now, as far as Iraq, what's going to happen? Nobody knows. It's possible that by a miraculous way, the Iraqi government, if they change course, they may be able to bring all the Iraqi people together, but they have to start treating the Sunnis, in a way not as unfair as they are being treated right now. Now, the Shiite have took over the government completely. There are death squads within the police force. They go and kill Sunni and etc. And so if they're able to miraculously change that, they may be able to put the country together. Absent that, I think what's going to happen is that we will pull our military when it becomes situations unmanageable. It becomes like a Vietnam for sure. And then Iraq is going to battle it out. There's going to be so much bloodshed, may go over years and years. And it's possible that Iraq may never ever be one country the way it was before. And if that happens, then this will be legacy of George W. Bush, because nobody forced him to attack Iraq. And it was a one-man decision. And whatever happens in Iraq will be the direct result of his decision to invade.
But maybe when the order made to invade, to make that invasion in Iraq, maybe we or our president didn't realize that Shia, if they become stronger in Iraq, that means Iran in it. Now they know that. They know the fact that Shia controlled by Iran, not as Iraqi or Arab Muslim country. What about this point? Don't we think that Iran in Iraq will be bad for us?
Absolutely. I mean, Iran is a country of 70 or 80 million people, and historically they have always been, national, antagonism and warfare between the Persians, which are the Iranians, and the Arab, empire before the Arab empire disintegrated into 23 or so Arab countries. Now, the greatest beneficiary right now of whatever happened in Iraq is Iran. I mean, Israel benefited in the short run only in terms of getting rid of Saddam Hussein, but in the long run I don't think it benefits, because here you're going to have a situation where Iran is going to get stronger, and there's going to be a chaotic situation which may spread to Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, which are on the borders of Israel. So Israel may end up by egging George Bush to invade Iraq, having the effect of this war on its own borders. They have to deal, instead of right now dealing with the northern border with Lebanon, they may have to deal with equally angry and angry masses at all its borders: Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, and it may not be able to actually contain the situation. It may spell the end of Israel. So the sooner Israel adopts a peaceful legislative approach, which will have the direct result of de-escalating the tensions within the Arab and Muslim people, within Israel and around Israel, the more certain that Israel will continue to exist as a secular democratic state, not as exclusive state for Jewish people only.
Someday, Great Britain was the greatest in the world, and it has countries never have some say before Israel come to the area. And today, Great Britain no longer, it's a Great Britain, and Russia is not around, and we as America, the most powerful country in the whole world. And I believe we have the ability to control the war different way than the war. If we think deeply, where's our benefit, how we can benefit if we have peace solution for all areas we are involved in it. I believe we will do better for our new generation, or we will write better history for tomorrow. And I think we should think 10 times. If we thought twice before we did make decisions before, that means we rush it. We should think 10 times before we do any kind of big decision like what we did last year. So I believe, or I hope, that we will write better history for future this year. And on behalf of my viewers, I would like to thank you, Mr. Sami, about this kind of information. Actually, we cannot have it except from you, because I know you know both sides. You are as American and you are as Palestinian. Knowledge is important for that matter.
Thank you, Nahed, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to express my views and help shed light on these issues which are not clear to our citizenry here. And I would like to wish you a Merry Christmas, Happy Eid, and Happy New Year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Again, let's hope this year, 2007, will be much better than last year. And let's hope that we will share and we will help the whole world as a powerful America to write better page in the history for our generations to come. On behalf of my guest, I thank you, my viewers, and see you next time.